2 weeks ago, I woke up in a hospital bed with stitches in my head, a tube in my arm, and a photo of my family smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower on my phone. The caption said, "Family trip in Paris. Finally, no stress, no drama." I had just had emergency brain surgery, and the first real proof I saw that they knew was that post. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I just stared at it. Then at the 65 missed calls from my dad that started showing up later, and I knew, right then, they weren't calling because they were scared for me. They were calling because something had shifted, and for once, it wasn't me chasing them. If I start at the collapse, you miss the part that makes it sting. So I need to back up a few weeks, because none of this came out of nowhere. It just stopped hiding. 4 weeks before graduation, I was standing in my mom's kitchen while she flipped through wedding magazines like she was working a full-time job. Except the wedding wasn't even for her. It was for my older sister Meredith, who had gotten engaged and somehow turned that into a family-wide emergency. My graduation was in less than a month, and I was valedictorian, which sounds like the kind of thing a parent would care about, but in my house, it barely made the list. I asked my mom if we could maybe go shopping for something to wear to the ceremony, and she didn't even really look at me. She just said I was good at finding deals online and that she needed to focus on Meredith's engagement party because Tyler's parents were coming, and everything had to be perfect. That was the word in my family. Perfect. Not loving, not fair, not supportive. Perfect. And perfect always meant Meredith got center stage and I got handed a task list. I'd been living like that for years, working 25 hours a week at a coffee shop, keeping a 4.0, paying for school with scholarships and tips, and still somehow being treated like the low-maintenance child who should be grateful for not being a problem. Later that night, I overheard my mom on the phone telling her friend that yes, I was valedictorian, but honestly the timing was terrible because Meredith's engagement party was that same week, and that had to come first. She said, "Grace understands. She's always been so independent." I remember standing there in the hallway holding a towel thinking, independent is what people call you when they've decided they don't have to show up for you. The only person who actually asked me how I was doing was my grandpa, Howard. When I called in that night, he asked about my finals, my speech, whether I had shoes, whether I needed anything. I almost lied and said I was fine, but he always heard through me. He told me he'd be front row at graduation and that he had something for me, a gift my grandmother wanted me to have when I finished college. Before he could explain, Meredith barged into my room asking if I'd used her dry shampoo, and that pretty much summed up the whole family dynamic right there. By the week before graduation, I was running on caffeine, ibuprofen, and stubbornness. Finals were done, my thesis was submitted, and I was picking up extra shifts because rent was due, and I'd rather pass out in public than ask my parents for help and hear about it for the next 5 years. My head had been pounding for days, and I kept telling myself it was stress because stress sounded manageable. A brain tumor did not. My mom called while I was wiping tables after closing and told me I needed to come home that weekend to help set up Meredith's engagement party. Not asked. Told. I said I was working, and she said, "Call in sick. Meredith needs you." I remember gripping the phone so hard my fingers hurt and asking, "What about what I need?" She got quiet for half a second, then hit me with, "Grace, don't be dramatic. It's one weekend." That's the kind of line that gets under your skin because it sounds small, but it does a lot of damage. It tells you your needs are an inconvenience before you even finish saying them. That same night, I had a nosebleed that lasted long enough to scare me, and on the drive home, I got a text from Meredith reminding me to pick up custom napkins and wear something nice because Tyler's parents would be there. Rachel came over later with Thai food, and one look at my face told her everything. She said I looked like death. And because Rachel has always been the one person in my life who refuses to accept my fake, "I'm fine," she sat in my kitchen and told me the truth I'd been dodging. My family was using me because I made it easy. I kept trying to earn something they had already decided not to give me. I argued with her, weakly, because part of me still wanted to believe graduation would be different. It was my graduation, after all. Valedictorian, big stage, big moment. Surely they'd show up for that. Rachel just looked at me and said, "In 4 years, they haven't shown up once. Why would they magically become different now?" I didn't answer because I couldn't. That night, my vision doubled while I was brushing my teeth, and I stood there gripping the sink, trying to force my body to get through one more week. The engagement party was exactly what you'd expect if you took all my family's priorities and laid them out with string lights and catered champagne. I spent 6 hours setting up chairs, arranging flowers, refilling glasses, and trying not to throw up from the pressure in my head. Meredith floated around the backyard in white, acting like she was already royalty, while my mom smiled at guests like she'd personally built the moon. At one point, Meredith pulled me over near the fountain and introduced me to Tyler's parents and a few of their friends. She wrapped an arm around me and said, "This is my little sister Grace. She does everything around here." People laughed like that was charming. Then she added, "She's going to be a teacher. Can you imagine? Wiping noses for a living." More laughter. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do, and then she tossed in, like it was nothing, "Oh, and she graduates next week." "Valedict something," I said, "valedictorian," and she just waved a hand and said, "Right, she's the smart one, but smart doesn't buy designer bags." Even now, I can still hear that light, easy laugh from the people around us. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It did the job. Later, after everyone had eaten and taken photos and praised Meredith for existing, my mom found me in the kitchen doing dishes and told me the whole family was going to Paris the next Friday night to celebrate the engagement. My graduation was Saturday morning. I just stood there with dishwater on my hands and said, "You're missing my graduation for a vacation?" She corrected me immediately. It wasn't a vacation, apparently. It was for Meredith. Then my dad came in and backed her up. He told me Meredith needed family support right now and that I was strong, that I didn't need them the way she did. I don't remember leaving the house. I remember sitting in my car afterward with both hands on the steering wheel, not turning the key, just staring straight ahead while my head pounded so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. 3 days before graduation, I was lying on my apartment floor trying to decide whether I was heartbroken, sick, or just finally out of excuses for them. The morning after the party, I woke up still wearing the same sweatshirt I had cried in the night before. My phone was on the floor beside me, face down, like even it was tired of bringing me bad news. I had texts from my mom about leftover dishes, one from Meredith asking if I had taken home one of the centerpiece vases by mistake, and one from my dad that just said, "Don't make your mother feel guilty about Paris." That was the first time I remember feeling something different from hurt. Not anger exactly, more like a cold little click inside me. Like one tiny lock had opened and I could finally see the shape of the door. They weren't just forgetting me. They were already preparing the story where I was the unreasonable one for noticing. Rachel called around noon, and I made the mistake of answering while lying flat on my carpet. She heard my voice and immediately said, "You're on the floor again, aren't you?" I told her I was fine, which was stupid because I was staring at a water stain on my ceiling and trying not to move my head too fast. She asked if my family had really booked Paris over graduation, and I said yes, but it was for Meredith's engagement, and maybe Tyler had already paid, and maybe it was complicated. Rachel got quiet in that way she did when she was trying not to yell. Then she said, "Grace, stop writing their excuses for them. They're adults. They know what Saturday is." That hit harder than I wanted it to, because I had been doing exactly that for years. I would hear something cruel, then immediately translate it into something softer so I could survive sitting at the same table with them. By then, the headaches were getting harder to ignore. They weren't normal headaches anymore. They felt like pressure building behind my eyes, like someone had tightened a band around the inside of my skull. I'd get dizzy standing up. My vision would blur at the edges. Twice that week, I caught myself rereading the same sentence in my speech because the words had started sliding around on the page. I still didn't go to a doctor. That sounds ridiculous now, but at the time my brain kept doing the same old thing it always did. Get through this first. Don't make a scene. Don't become one more problem. The night before graduation, I woke up at 3 a.m. with another nosebleed, worse than the first one. I sat on the bathroom tile with tissues pressed to my face, watching red spots hit the sink, and I remember thinking, I should call someone. Not my mom, not my dad. Grandpa. Rachel had told me that if anything happened, I should call him because he was the only one who would actually pick up. I didn't call, but I did open the university emergency contact form and add his name under my parents'. I don't know why I did it then. I just know my hand moved before I talked myself out of it. Grandpa called the next evening while I was practicing my speech for the 100th time. His voice sounded warm and excited, like the next day mattered because I mattered. He told me he had already booked a small hotel near campus so he could be early, and I laughed because the ceremony didn't start until 10 a.m., but he said, "Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Gracie." Then he brought up the gift again. He said my grandmother Eleanor had wanted me to have it when I graduated college, that she had made him promise years ago. I didn't know what to say because I barely knew how to receive a birthday card without feeling like I owed someone an apology. Then he asked if my father had ever told me he'd offered to help with my tuition. I sat up in bed. My dad had always said Grandpa couldn't afford to help both me and Meredith, and since Meredith's school was more expensive and she needed the support, I had accepted it. Grandpa went quiet. Not confused, angry quiet. Then he said we'd talk after the ceremony and told me one thing before hanging up. "You are not alone, Grace." You never were. I wanted to believe him so badly that it almost hurt worse than not believing him. Graduation morning started with a text from my mom. "Just landed in Paris. Have a great graduation, sweetie. So proud of you." There was a selfie attached from Charles de Gaulle Airport. Mom smiling, Dad giving a thumbs up, Meredith leaning into Tyler with sunglasses on her head like she was starring in a travel ad. I stared at the photo while sitting on the edge of my bed in my cap and gown, and for 1 second I actually felt embarrassed. Not because of what they had done, but because some part of me had still hoped maybe they would change their minds. Rachel picked me up at 9 and immediately said I looked gray. She made me eat half a granola bar in the car, and I got through maybe 3 bites before my stomach turned. Campus was packed with families carrying flowers and balloons, parents fixing crooked caps, siblings taking pictures, grandparents crying before anything had even started. I tried not to look too long at any of them. In the staging area, I checked my phone again, because apparently I liked hurting my own feelings. My mom had texted, "Send pics, we want to see everything." That one made me laugh once, quietly, and not in a happy way. They wanted to see everything, just not badly enough to be there. Then I saw Grandpa in the front row. He was wearing a gray suit and sitting beside Rachel, holding a manila envelope on his lap like it mattered. 2 empty seats were next to them, marked reserved, because I had still told the school my parents were coming. That detail bothered me more than I expected. Empty seats look louder when everyone else's are full. A stage manager touched my shoulder and said I was up in 10 minutes, and I remember looking at those 2 chairs and deciding I wasn't going to cry. I was going to walk across that stage, give that speech, and let my grandfather be proud enough for all of them. When they called my name, the applause rose around me and I stepped up to the podium. The lights were too bright. My cap felt too tight. My mouth was dry. But I found Grandpa's face and started. "Thank you all for being here today," I said. "I stand before you, not just because of grades or test scores, but because of the people who believed in me." I had written that line weeks earlier, back when I still thought my parents would be in the audience. The words got stuck for half a second because I could see the empty seats right there beside my grandfather. Then the stage tilted. My vision narrowed. I heard my own voice say something about people believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And then a pain shot through my head so sharp that I lost the microphone. I saw Grandpa stand up. I saw Rachel's mouth open. I saw the 2 empty chairs one last time, and then the floor came up fast. I don't remember the ambulance. I don't remember the stretcher or the siren or the way the crowd went quiet after I hit the stage. Rachel told me later that she ran so fast down the aisle she almost knocked over one of the faculty marshals. And Grandpa kept saying my name like if he said it enough times, I would open my eyes just to reassure him. The school nurse was there first, then campus security, then paramedics. Someone kept asking for my parents' number, and Rachel kept saying, "They're in Paris," like she couldn't believe she had to say that out loud. The ambulance took 14 minutes. Rachel remembered that because she watched every second of it happen, while my grandfather held my hand and tried not to fall apart in front of strangers. At the hospital, everything moved fast. CT scan, MRI, doctors walking in and out with the kind of faces people make when they're trying not to scare you, but already know they're going to. The neurosurgeon told Rachel and Grandpa there was a tumor pressing where it should not have been pressing, and they needed to operate immediately. Rachel said the room went completely still after that. Not quiet exactly, because hospitals are never quiet, but still in the way people get when the words are too big to fit into the moment. They needed family consent, so Rachel called my mom first, straight to voicemail. Then my dad, straight to voicemail. Then again, and again. She left messages that got worse each time because panic was breaking through her voice. "Grace is in the hospital. This is an emergency. Please call us back." Nothing. Grandpa finally called my dad from his own phone, and my dad picked up on the 5th ring, probably because he assumed it was about money or travel or something normal. Grandpa told him exactly what was happening. He said I had collapsed during my speech, that the doctors had found a brain tumor, that surgery was happening within the hour. Rachel said she could hear my dad's voice faintly through the phone, and the first thing he said after a long pause was, "Dad, we're about to board." Grandpa didn't yell right away. That's how Rachel knew he was furious. He said very slowly, "Your daughter is about to have emergency brain surgery." My dad said there was nothing they could do from the airport, and by the time they got back, I'd probably be out of surgery anyway. That sentence stayed with me after Rachel told me. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was practical in the ugliest way. He had already turned my emergency into a scheduling problem. Grandpa told him, "If you get on that plane, don't bother calling me again." My dad got on the plane. So did my mom. So did Meredith. And because I had added Grandpa to that emergency form the night before, he signed the consent papers while Rachel stood beside him with my phone in her hand and my speech card still crumpled in her purse. When I woke up 3 days later, the first thing I saw was the ceiling. White tiles, fluorescent light, that weird hospital brightness that makes everything look washed out. Then I saw Grandpa asleep in a chair beside my bed, still in the same suit from graduation, wrinkled now, his tie loosened, one hand resting near mine like he had fallen asleep guarding me. Rachel was curled on a cot in the corner, with her hoodie pulled over her head. I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw and dry, and the sound that came out barely counted as a word. Rachel woke up first. She stared at me for half a second, then jumped up so fast the cot scraped against the floor. She kept saying my name, and then Grandpa woke up and his face did something I had never seen before. He looked relieved and wrecked at the same time. He called me his brave girl, and I wanted to cry, but I was too tired and too confused. I asked what happened. Rachel explained it carefully, like she was afraid each word might hurt me more than the last. Tumor, surgery, benign, 3 days unconscious. I listened, but my mind kept circling back to one thing. My parents. I saw my phone charging on the nightstand and asked for it before Rachel could stop me. She hesitated, which told me enough, but she handed it over. I didn't open my messages first. I don't know why. I opened Instagram. Maybe some part of me wanted proof they had come home. Maybe I wanted to be wrong about them. Instead, the first post on my feed was Meredith's photo. My whole family in front of the Eiffel Tower at sunset, smiling like they had stepped out of a vacation brochure. The caption said, "Family trip in Paris. Finally, no stress, no drama." There were hashtags about family time and being blessed. There were comments from relatives telling them to enjoy every second. I stared at that photo until the screen dimmed. My mom had known. My dad had known. Meredith had known enough to know something was wrong, even if she didn't care how wrong. And still they posed there, in clean clothes, under pretty lights, while I was waking up with bandages on my head and no idea what pieces of my life had changed. Rachel whispered, "Grace, they know you're here." Grandpa didn't say anything. His jaw was tight, and that was worse. I scrolled through the other photos because apparently one wound wasn't enough. Champagne at a cafe. Meredith in a dress that cost more than my rent. Dad holding a pastry and smiling. Not one mention of me. Not one vague thinking of someone back home. Nothing. I closed the app and handed the phone back to Rachel. I expected myself to cry, but I didn't. I just felt empty in a very clean way, like my body had finally stopped making excuses before my brain did. The next few days were slow. Nurses came in and out. Doctors told me I was lucky, which was strange because I didn't feel lucky. Grandpa brought soup and threatened to spoon-feed me if I didn't eat. Rachel slept in uncomfortable chairs and argued with hospital staff like she was my legal guardian. My phone stayed mostly quiet at first, except for a few delayed texts from my mom asking me to send photos from graduation, like she had missed a school play instead of emergency surgery. I didn't respond. I didn't post. I didn't confront anyone. I just watched the room, listened to machines beep, and learned what it felt like when the people who loved you were the ones sitting there with bad coffee and wrinkled clothes, not the ones with your last name. Then, on the 4th day after surgery, my phone started buzzing so much that Rachel thought something was wrong with it. One missed call from Dad became 5, then 12, then 20. By the time I picked it up, there were 65 missed calls and more than 20 texts. "Grace, call me back. Important. Answer your phone. We need to talk now." My mom wrote, "Honey, call your father, please." Meredith wrote, "What did you do?" "Dad is freaking out." I read every single message twice, waiting for one that said, "Are you okay?" There wasn't one. Not one. Just urgency. Just demand. Just the same old expectation that when my family called, I was supposed to answer, no matter what state I was in. I showed Grandpa the phone when he woke up, and his face went dark. He sat down beside my bed, took a breath, and said, "Grace, they're not calling because they're worried. They're calling because I told them about your grandmother's gift." For a second, I thought the medication had made me hear him wrong. My grandmother's gift had always sounded like something small and sentimental. Maybe a bracelet, maybe a letter, maybe one of those old family things people wrap in tissue paper and expect you to understand. I looked at Grandpa, then at the manila envelope sitting on the chair beside him, and my stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with surgery. He told me he and Grandma Eleanor had opened an account before I was even old enough to hold a pencil. Not tuition, exactly. He called it a freedom fund, money that was supposed to go directly to me after college so I could start my adult life without begging anyone for permission. He said Grandma had insisted on that part, directly to Grace, not through my parents, not for the family. Me. I asked him how much was in it, and he didn't give me the exact number right away. He just said it was enough for a down payment on a small house, or graduate school, or time to breathe while I figured out what I wanted. I remember laughing once, very softly, because the idea of having time to breathe sounded more impossible than the money. Then he told me the part that made the room feel smaller. 4 years earlier, when I started college, my dad had asked Grandpa for help with tuition. Grandpa had written 2 checks, one for Meredith and one for me, same amount. My parents cashed both. Meredith's went toward her school. Mine did not. Grandpa had assumed for years that I knew, or at least that some of it had helped me, until our phone call before graduation made it obvious that my parents had told me a different story. I sat there in that hospital bed with tape still pulling at my skin and thought about all the nights I closed the coffee shop at midnight, all the mornings I went to class with burnt fingers from the espresso machine, all the times my mom called me resourceful, like it was a compliment. They had taken money meant for me and still let me work myself sick. Maybe the kitchen remodel had swallowed it, maybe Mom's handbags, maybe Meredith's apartment deposit or family trips or whatever emergency sounded prettier than stealing from your own daughter. Grandpa didn't call it stealing. He was too careful for that. I was not. I said, "So they stole from me." And he closed his eyes like the word hurt because it fit. The calls made sense after that. My dad wasn't panicking because I'd almost died. He was panicking because Grandpa had gotten angry at the airport and told him that if he didn't come home, the gift would go to me without any family discussion. Family discussion. That phrase made me want to laugh again, except this time I might have actually started crying if I did. In my family discussion meant my parents decided what Meredith needed, then explained why Grace should understand. Grandpa said he shouldn't have mentioned the money while I was in surgery, but he had been scared and furious and disgusted. I told him I was glad he did, because at least now I knew what kind of emergency made my parents move. A tumor didn't do it. A plane didn't turn around for that. But money with my name on it brought them home fast enough. They arrived the next afternoon, and I heard them before I saw them. My mother's heels clicked down the hallway like she was walking into a restaurant, and her voice carried past the nurse's station. Grace Donovan, which room? Rachel was sitting beside my bed, and she stood up the second we heard them. She said, "Do you want me to leave?" I said no so fast it surprised both of us. I needed someone in that room who remembered what had actually happened. Mom came in first, with her face arranged into that soft, public version of concern she used when other people were watching. She leaned toward me with both arms out and said, "Oh, baby, we came as fast as we could." I didn't lift my arms. I just looked at her and said, 5 days. Her face twitched. She said flights were complicated, everything had been chaotic, they were doing their best. Behind her, Dad stood with his hands in his pockets, staring somewhere near the foot of my bed. Meredith came in last, holding shopping bags from a boutique, actual shopping bags, and said, "You look better than I expected." Like I had a bad flu and not a shaved patch under a bandage. Mom glanced at Rachel and said we should talk privately as a family. I said, "Rachel stays." She tried that tight smile, the one that usually meant I was supposed to stop embarrassing her. "Grace, this is sensitive." I said, "Rachel was here before surgery. Rachel was here when I woke up. She stays." Nobody knew what to do with me saying no in a normal voice. That was almost funny. Then Grandpa walked in, and the room changed immediately. My dad straightened. My mom stopped performing. Meredith looked annoyed before she looked worried. Grandpa didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked to my side, put one hand on the rail of my bed, and said, "I see you finally found room in your itinerary." My mother opened her mouth, but he cut her off with one look. He asked my dad how he could board a plane after being told his daughter was about to have brain surgery. Dad said they had been overwhelmed and didn't understand how serious it was. Rachel made a sound from the window, and I knew she was trying not to say something that would get her thrown out. Grandpa said, "I told you the words emergency brain surgery, Douglas. Which part sounded casual?" That was when the first crack showed. My dad's face went red, and my mom stepped in like she always did when the story needed managing. She said this wasn't fair, that they were worried, that they had cut the trip short. I asked her if she cut it short before or after the Eiffel Tower post about no stress and no drama. She looked at me like I had slapped her. And for a second, I thought maybe shame had finally gotten through. Then Meredith said, "We didn't know you were going to make such a big deal out of a caption." That sentence did something to the room. Even Dad looked at her. I stared at my sister and felt the last soft place in me harden just a little. I said, "I had brain surgery, Meredith. You went shopping." She looked down at the bags in her hand like she had forgotten she was holding proof. Grandpa turned toward Meredith first, not because she was the worst person in the room, but because she had said the thing nobody could smooth over. He looked at the bags, then at her face, and asked, "Did you buy those before or after you found out your sister was awake?" Meredith's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she didn't have a quick little joke ready. My mom tried to step in again, saying Meredith was upset too, that everyone processed fear differently, that the trip had already been ruined enough. Ruined. That word sat there between us. I was in a hospital bed with a line in my arm and stitches in my scalp, and somehow the ruined thing was still their vacation. Dad finally said, "Can we please talk about this rationally?" Grandpa gave him a look I had never seen from him before. Not loud, not dramatic, just done. "Rationally would have been getting off the plane," he said. "Rationally would have been answering the hospital. Rationally would have been asking if your daughter was alive before asking about money." My dad flinched at that last word, and my mom went still. That was how I knew Grandpa was right. They had come in ready to play worried family, but the second money was said out loud, all the air changed. Mom said, "That inheritance belongs to this family," and then stopped herself like she realized too late that she had said the quiet part with Rachel still in the room. I looked at her for a long second. I wanted to be shocked, but mostly I was tired. "So that's why you came home," I said. Mom shook her head too fast. She said no, of course not, that I was her daughter, that she loved me, that I was twisting everything because I was hurt. But she didn't ask about my pain. She didn't ask what the doctor said. She didn't ask what I remembered from the stage. She talked about how this looked, how Grandpa had blindsided them, how family money should be handled as a family. I said, "You mean handled by you?" Dad murmured my name like a warning, and that almost made me laugh. Even there, with half my head bandaged, he was still trying to keep me polite. Then Grandpa asked him when my birthday was. It came out so suddenly that my dad looked confused. "What?" Grandpa repeated it. "When is Grace's birthday?" Dad blinked and said, "March," then corrected himself to April, then stopped. I said, "October 15th. My voice was quiet, but the room heard it. Grandpa asked my mom what job I had accepted after graduation. She looked away. He asked Meredith who my best friend was. Meredith said, "Rachel," but she said it like she had just remembered from seeing her in the room. Rachel folded her arms and stared at the floor because she was probably one wrong breath away from speaking for me. Grandpa said, "You don't know her. You know what she does for you." That line landed harder than yelling would have. My mom broke after that, but not the way I expected. She didn't collapse into an apology. She got angry first. She said Grandpa had always judged her, that Eleanor had judged her, that no matter what she did in this family, she was never enough for the Donovans. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and her face twisted with something I had seen my whole life but never understood. "You look exactly like her," she said. "Every time I looked at you, I saw Eleanor looking back at me." The room went so quiet I could hear the monitor beside my bed. For a few seconds I couldn't even respond. I had spent my life thinking maybe I was too needy, too plain, too quiet, too much work in the wrong ways. And my mother was telling me I had been punished for having the wrong face. I wish I could say I had some powerful answer ready. I didn't. I sat there with my mouth dry, trying to make sense of being blamed for a woman I barely knew. Finally, I said, "I was a baby." My mom covered her face. "I know," she said, but she said it like knowing hadn't changed anything. That hurt more than if she had denied it. I told her I understood that Eleanor had hurt her. I even meant it, at least partly. But then I told her she had taken that hurt and handed it to me every day for 22 years, and I was done carrying it. My voice shook a little, but it didn't break. I turned to Dad and told him he had watched it happen because silence was easier than protecting me. He didn't argue. He just stared at his hands and said, "I failed you." For once, he didn't add an excuse after it. Grandpa put the manila envelope on my lap. It felt heavier than paper should feel. My mom's eyes followed it, and I saw the old habit in her face, the calculation, the family plan forming before she could stop it. I said, "I'm not using this for Meredith's wedding. I'm not using it for your renovation. I'm not putting it into a family account." Meredith snapped, "That's selfish." Rachel actually laughed once, sharp and ugly, but she didn't say anything. I looked at my sister and said, "I almost died. And you posted vacation pictures. Don't talk to me about selfish. Her face changed then. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to show the words had gotten through. She grabbed her bags and left the room without another word. After Meredith walked out, my mom cried for real. I could tell because it wasn't pretty, and she wasn't watching who saw it. She said she was sorry, and I believed that she was sorry in that moment. I just didn't know what her sorry was worth yet. I told her if she wanted any chance of being in my life, she needed help. Actual help. Not another family dinner where everyone pretended the bad part was over. She nodded, but I didn't trust the nod. Dad asked if there was any way we could start again, and I told him maybe, slowly, but not from the same place. He would have to call, show up, listen, and not just when it was convenient. He said he would. I didn't promise him I would believe it. When they left, the room felt bigger and emptier at the same time. Rachel came over and squeezed my hand, and Grandpa sat back down like his whole body had been holding itself upright on anger alone. I opened the envelope later, after the nurse checked my vitals and after Rachel forced me to drink water. There were account papers, a letter from Grandpa, and one old photograph of Eleanor holding me when I was a baby. She was smiling down at me like I was not a burden, not a reminder, not a problem to work around. Just me. I stared at that photo for a long time because I had never seen myself looked at that way by someone with my own blood. That was the first night I understood. The money mattered, yes, but the real gift was proof. Proof that someone in my family had wanted me before I ever learned how to be useful. The hospital discharged me 2 weeks after graduation, and I remember feeling strange when the nurse cut off my wristband. That little plastic band had been annoying me for days, but the second it came off, I felt exposed. Like the hospital had been proof that what happened was real, and now I was supposed to walk back into the world and function. Grandpa drove me to the tiny apartment I rented near the middle school where I'd be teaching in the fall. I used a small part of Grandma Eleanor's gift for the deposit, a bed, a used kitchen table, and 2 bookshelves Rachel found on Facebook Marketplace and acted like she had discovered buried treasure. It wasn't fancy. The kitchen was so small I could open the fridge and touch the sink at the same time, but nobody in that apartment expected me to refill champagne, pick up napkins, or pretend an empty seat didn't hurt. It was mine. That mattered more than I thought it would. The fallout came in pieces, not all at once. Meredith blocked me on everything, then changed her bio to something about people not appreciating family, which Rachel said was the most Meredith thing she could possibly do. A week later, Tyler started hearing what had happened from his own mother, who had heard enough from the hospital grapevine and the graduation crowd to ask questions Meredith did not want to answer. The engagement got paused, then quietly disappeared. I didn't celebrate it, even though Rachel wanted me to at least enjoy the irony for one afternoon. I knew what it felt like to have your life fall apart in public, and I didn't want to become someone who enjoyed that. But I also didn't take responsibility for it. When Mom texted me, "Meredith is devastated. I hope you're happy." I stared at the message for a long time and wrote back, "I'm not happy she's hurt. I'm also not the reason people know what happened." Mom didn't answer. Dad did call the next Tuesday, right when he said he would. The call was awkward enough to make both of us uncomfortable, but he asked how I was feeling, what I'd eaten, whether I needed a ride to a follow-up appointment. And for once, he waited for the answer. It wasn't enough to fix 22 years. It was enough to be the first honest inch. 3 months later, I was standing in my classroom, trying to make 26 mismatched desks look intentional. Rachel was hanging posters badly and eating chips she claimed were her payment. Grandpa came by with a box of old books and a letter Grandma Eleanor had written before she died, addressed to my future granddaughter, which still makes no sense in the practical way, but I stopped trying to make everything practical. In that letter, Eleanor didn't tell me to be perfect. She didn't tell me to be useful. She wrote that if I ever felt unseen, I should remember that people can be wrong about your value, even when they are loud about it. I sat at my teacher's desk and cried in a way that felt quiet and embarrassing, and Rachel just handed me tissues without making it a whole thing. That classroom became the first place where I wasn't the spare person in the room. I was Miss Donovan. I made the seating chart. I chose the books. I put up a bulletin board that said, "Every voice matters." And yes, Rachel teased me for it, but I kept it there anyway. About 6 months into teaching, one of my quietest students, Marcus Reed, stayed after class and asked if I had ever felt like nobody saw me. He looked so nervous saying it that I had to sit down before I answered. I told him yes. I didn't give him my whole life story because he was 13 and didn't need that from me. But I told him there are times when the people around you get used to your silence and mistake it for not needing anything. I told him the hard part is learning to hear yourself before everyone else does. He nodded like he was saving the sentence somewhere, and after he left, I sat alone in that classroom for a while. The sunlight was coming through the windows, hitting the empty desks, and I thought about those 2 empty seats at graduation. For a long time, those seats had felt like the final proof that I didn't matter enough. Now I had a whole room of seats I was responsible for, and I knew exactly how much it mattered to notice who was sitting quietly in the back. A year after graduation, Meredith called me. Tyler was gone for good by then. Her credit cards were a mess, and Mom and Dad were treating her disappointment like an embarrassment instead of pain. She cried on the phone and admitted she had been jealous, spoiled, and cruel because she never had to think about what things cost me. I didn't rescue her. I didn't pay her debt. I didn't invite her to move in or pretend we were suddenly sisters from a holiday commercial. But I stayed on the phone, and I told her I didn't hate her. That was all I had to give at first. Dad still calls on Tuesdays. Mom sends cards on holidays, careful little cards with too much blank space inside. Meredith is in therapy, and sometimes she texts me something normal, like a picture of coffee or a complaint about traffic, and I answer when I have the room for it. My real family is still the people who showed up when showing up was inconvenient. Grandpa, Rachel, and the people who learned to love me without needing me to earn it first. I used to think love was something I had to work hard enough to deserve. I thought if I got the grades, helped with the parties, stayed quiet, and made life easier for everyone else, eventually my family would look over and realize I had been there the whole time. I don't believe that anymore. Love is not proven by blood, captions, or family photos where everyone smiles at the right angle. Love is who answers the phone, who sits beside the bed, who remembers your birthday without guessing, who shows up before there is money on the table. If this story hit you somewhere personal, please like, share, and subscribe so more people who feel invisible can find it too. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been treated like the useful one instead of the loved one? What was the moment you finally saw it clearly? Who was the person who showed up for you when others didn't? I read those comments, and I mean that.